Laughter stopped the wagon before the rains did. Samuel Bell had not come with lumber. He had come with Birch.
What's this? Building a beaver's nest, stranger.
Samuel ignored the jeer. He began unloading fallen logs, their pale bark still damp from the mountain air.
They don't know what this wood can do. Not yet.
That bark will rot by spring, or the mice will nest in it. You are wasting your time.
Planks warp and leak. Bark sheds rain. The first ones here knew that.
George's laugh rolled through the clearing. The other men joined in, shaking their heads at the strange newcomer.
Let them laugh. The cold will have its say soon enough.
By nightfall, Samuel had stacked the first layers. The bark gleamed pale against the darkening logs. He worked alone, under a sky that had already started to smell of frost. Morning came cold, and with it, George Harlow returned, his face set hard.
Still messing with that bark trash, Bell? The valley's laughing at you.
My cabin. My choice, Harlow. I'll build it as I see fit.
That bark will rot before first snow. You'll be freezing in a beaver's nest.
From the cabin door, Mary stepped out, her shawl pulled tight, concern plain.
Samuel, maybe you should listen. They've been in this valley much longer than us.
Mary, I've read old journals. This bark has kept men warm when planks froze solid.
Old journals. You put your faith in native scribbles?
It's not faith. It's knowing that steel nails rust and planks warp, but bark bends with the cold.
George spat and stalked off. Mary pressed a hand to the pale bark, then glanced at Samuel, worried but no longer arguing. The next afternoon, George returned, this time with half a dozen mill hands in tow. Their boots stirred the mud like a jury arriving.
Still at it, Bell boys. I told you, the man's covering his house in beaver fodder.
Laughter rippled through the group. One man cupped his hands and called out something about mice palaces.
They can jeer. Winter has no ears for jokes.
Samuel hammered another sheet into place, his rhythm unchanged. Mary watched from the doorway, knuckles white on the frame.
Samuel, tell me more about those journals, please. I need to understand.
I found them in a hollow tree on the ridge. Pages described this bark, laid just so. It kept a family alive through winters worse than any we've seen.
It feels solid, not a single draft.
By evening, the last of the main cladding was in place. The cabin stood wrapped in a pale, overlapping skin.
He'll regret this. First, hard frost will split that bark like paper.
Snow came before dawn, a thin, dry powder that settled on the valley, like a held breath. Samuel climbed the ladder one last time, hammering a trim strip beneath the eaves.
See that, Bell? Even a cobweb holds snow a while. Wait till it melts and soaks through that trash.
He didn't look down. The hammer blows were his only answer.
Mary stepped out, wrapped in wool, and pressed her fingers to the bark. The snow melted on contact, beating into droplets that rolled away.
Samuel, it's not even wet underneath.
It never is. Birch bark has a wax in it. Nature's own seal.
They went inside, where the stove had already pushed the chill out of the single room. Mary stood by the fire, listening to the silence.
I can't hear the wind, not a whistle. It's like the walls are breathing instead of fighting.
Outside, George frowned at the cabin from the road, then turned toward his own house, where frost already traced the window glass.
First real frost hasn't even hit. That bark will crack open like a split log.
For 3 days, a cold, steady rain fell, turning the valley to mud. Inside the bark cabin, Mary stood at the window, watching the downpour, her shoulders braced for the first leak.
Nothing. Not a trickle. Samuel, I've been watching for hours.
Birch bark sheds water like a bird's feather. It won't let it in.
Mary pressed her palm flat against the bark wall. The surface was cold but dry, and let the not a feeling fitting finish naturally.
This is real? He was right all along.
Across the valley, water found every gap in the sawnboard houses. In one kitchen, A woman set buckets beneath 3 different leaks. The rising damp carried the smell of wet pine and sour rot. Drafts sucked through nail holes, fluttering curtains and chilling every room. But inside Samuel's cabin, the air stayed still. Mary lifted the candle and the flame burned steady, not a flicker.
I was so worried. I thought we'd be the laughingstock of the valley.
Let them laugh, Mary. The rain is louder than their jokes tonight.
The morning after the rain, puddles still glinting in the road, George Harlow strode toward the bark cabin with a scowl.
Well, Belle, I see your heap of bark is still hanging on. Light rain couldn't knock it down, could it?
3 days of rain. George, not a single drop inside. You can check for yourself.
It won't last. Birch rots fast once the warmth strikes, and the mice, they'll nest in those layers and chew right through.
Mary stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron, her voice sharpening.
We have no mice, Mr. Harlow, and the bark is dry as tinder. Your planks, however, soaked through, from what I hear.
Lies. A few drips don't compare to a vermin-infested beaver lodge. You'll be burning your own walls before Christmas.
George turned to leave, but not before Mary's eyes burned into his back.
He'd rather let his own house rot than admit Samuel was right.
Let him go, Mary. The mountains will teach what I never could.
That evening, Samuel pulled out a small leather-bound diary from the trunk. Its pages were brittle, stained with years of resin and weather.
This is what I found in the hollow tree. The pages that saved us from freezing.
I need to see. I need to understand where this knowledge came from.
She took the diary and opened it carefully. The ink had faded, but the words were clear.
Settlers who lived in this valley 50 years ago. They built with bark because it was all they had.
The birch bark must overlap like shingles on a church roof. Sealed with spruce gum, it will keep out the worst storm. But if it was so effective, why did they stop? Why isn't every house in the valley wrapped in bark?
Because they were driven out, Mary. Their knowledge was buried with their names.
Driven out. Then, someone in this valley knows the truth and has kept silent.
The fire cracked. Outside, the first true cold of the season began to press against the bark and hold. 3 days later, George stopped a wagon on the main track and pointed at the bark cabin. A crowd gathered like crows at a roost.
I saw it myself, a big fat mouse creeping into that bark. It's a vermin nest, plain as day.
Men and women craned their necks. A woman in a shawl pulled her child closer. Someone whispered the word plague.
There are no mice in my walls. That bark is sealed tighter than any plank house in this valley.
Is it, then? Tear one sheet off. Let us see the filth you are hiding.
Tear it off so your rumors can get inside easier than the rain ever could?
A murmur ran through the crowd. A few looked down at their own frost-cracked board walls and said nothing.
Mark my words. Come spring, you'll be burning that bark to kill the lice.
He'll twist anything to keep his pride. But the walls don't need my voice to prove themselves.
The crowd thinned, leaving only the cold. But the silence that followed was heavier than the jeers. 3 nights later, the wind came down off the mountain like a freight train, carrying a wall of rain that flattened the grass.
I've never seen a storm like this. The wind is tearing at everything.
Good. Let it tear. Let it show the whole valley what this bark can do.
The rain hammered the bark walls in sheets, but inside the cabin, not a single drip. The seams held like welded iron. Across the valley, George Harlow's plank house was a different story. Water streamed down the inside walls, pooling on the floorboards. His wife huddled the children into one corner, but the rain found them there too, seeping through every nail hole.
That useless carpenter. I told him to caulk every last joint. He'll answer for this by thunder.
Every drop against this bark is a witness. Let the storm speak for me.
That bark should be soaking through by now. It doesn't make sense.
By dawn, the rain had stopped. Samuel stepped outside and pressed his hand to the bark, bone dry, and the valley had its answer. Inside, Samuel reached into the trunk again and pulled out a flat sheet of birch bark, larger than the others and unblemished.
What is this? There are names carved here. Matthias and Sonia Berg, 1847.
They were among the first to settle this valley, the same ones who wrote the diaries.
Then these are their true names, and they used this bark like we did.
Yes, I kept this last sheet as proof, so their knowledge wouldn't die with their memory.
But what happened to them? Did they move on?
The diary doesn't say, only that they were forced out by those who came later with sawmills and timber claims.
Forced out. Then the names behind these walls aren't just old knowledge. They're a debt.
She placed a small wildflower she had dried beside the carved bark, as if marking a grave. The storm had passed, but inside the cabin, the real storm, the weight of forgotten stories, had only just begun. Mary lifted her fingers from the carved letters. She looked at Samuel, her voice barely above the crackling fire.
You said they were forced out. By whom? Was it George's family?
The last pages mention a man named Harlow. He came with a timber deed and told them to leave.
So the town's pride was built on what it took, and George's grandfather was the thief.
Samuel unfolded the sketch map tucked in the diary's back cover, tracing the old claim line with a calloused thumb.
It says, Harlow's men returned with a warrant. We must leave before winter settles.
They fled in the cold while his family took the land. And now he ridicules the only thing that survived them.
If I'd told the town the truth, they'd say I built this cabin out of spite. I didn't. I built it out of memory.
They sat in silence, the carved sheet resting between them like a grave marker. The bark was more than a wall. It was the only thing still standing that remembered the people who first called this valley home. That week, a hard frost descended, painting the insides of every plank house white. George's kitchen walls glittered with it.
This cold bites deeper than any I remember, but I won't grovel at that bark lover's door.
In Samuel's cabin, the stove smoldered with half the fuel, yet the bark walls held the heat like a wool blanket.
The town needs to know what the Harlows did. This cold could kill someone while they still mock us.
If I speak now, they'll say I am using the weather for revenge. The bark must stand on its own.
A man died of pride last winter in the next valley. What's worse? Looking petty or letting the same thing happen here?
Outside, the frost thickened on George's eaves, and the silence from his chimney told the whole valley his house was losing.
We'll manage. My grandfather built this house, and it has never failed us.
His wife stared at the ice forming along the baseboard, but said nothing. The children's breath came in shallow white puffs. The valley held its breath. The bark held firm, and in the silence between two cabins, the truth waited for the deadliest winter yet to come. The blizzard fell like a hammer. Sleet lashed the valley, wind cutting through wool. Samuel threaded spruce root through the last seam. Not a whisper could breach this bark. Mary pressed her ear to the wall. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, only stillness. Across the valley, ice bloomed on Harlow's windows. The children's coughs sounded wet.
My grandfather took this land. Now the land is taking everything back.
The woodpile's low, but the bark holds every degree. I've never felt so safe.
In a dozen plank houses, families shivered. The beaver's nest didn't shiver. It held. Samuel ran his hand along the wall. Dry, solid. A fortress of bark. In the Harlow kitchen, a plank groaned. Ice pushed through the seam, and the wall wept cold. By midnight, the temperature dropped past anything alive could survive. But the bark cabin had become a fortress. In the Harlow house, the wall buckled. Ice swelled between the boards until the nails screamed. George's wife clutched the youngest, her voice cracking into a plea.
We are not leaving. This is my grandfather's house. It will hold.
Outside, a loose board on the roof tore free and cartwheeled into the dark. Samuel pressed his palm to the bark, warm and still. Through the window, the Harlow house swayed like a ship in a gale.
Samuel, we have to fetch them. Their house won't last the night.
He'll refuse. If I go, he'll curse me on his own doorstep.
Then let him curse. At least his children won't freeze.
I built these walls to remember the past. not to let a man and his children die in the present.
He pulled on his coat. The door shook as he unlatched it. Then, from the Harlow house, a wet crack split the night. Before Samuel could unbar the door, another sound cut through the gale, a woman pounding, a child limp in her arms. Samuel pulled them inside. The boy's lips were blue, his chest barely moving. Mary wrapped him in wool and pressed him near the stove. The bark walls held every degree.
His breathing is slowing. The cold was killing him.
Not in here. The bark won't let it in.
By dawn, the boy opened his eyes. A fever had broken where planks would have let it freeze. Other families peered through the storm, their own walls weeping. The bark cabin had become a lighthouse in ice.
They're going to Bell's. To that beaver's nest, but my grandfather's house.
Inside Harlow's house, the ice crept across the floor. His wife's eyes held a plea he couldn't answer. The bark walls didn't judge. They simply held, while every plank house in the valley began to break. At last, the walls surrendered. With a sound like bones breaking, the north side of the Harlow house tore open, vomiting ice and splinters into the storm. His wife yanked the children from their beds. Wrapped in blankets, they staggered into the white fury, the blizzard swallowing their cries.
To Bell's. Go. I'll be right behind.
He pounded the bark door with fists already turning blue. Samuel opened without hesitation, and the family burst inside. They stumbled into the warmth. Mary guided the children through the crowd, pressing them near the stove.
There's room for all. Move closer to the fire.
George stood last on the threshold, snow caking his beard, his eyes fixed on the floor. He could not lift them.
Step inside, George. Let the storm do its worst outside.
The door sealed shut. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the bark walls held them all, enemies and neighbors alike. George sat in the far corner, head in his hands, while his children slept for the first time in days without shivering.
Bell, how did you know this bark would hold? Nobody in this valley builds like that anymore.
Samuel didn't answer at once. He walked to the trunk and pulled out the carved sheet.
Because it worked for the people who were here before your grandfather's mill.
Matthias and Sonia Berg, 1847. I've heard that name.
They wrote down how to lay this bark. Your family drove them away, but the knowledge survived.
George's face went gray. His lips moved without sound.
Your grandfather's deeds, not yours. But they've been waiting a long time to be told.
The bark I mocked. It's wrapping me in the mercy of the people my family destroyed.
Outside, the blizzard still screamed. But inside, the only sound was the fire and the slow, heavy breathing of a man whose pride had just crumbled. In the corner, George's children slept on, guarded by the walls that should have been his enemy's gift.
It works. Your bark. It's better than anything I ever milled.
Samuel only nodded. The walls had already said everything.
I mocked you. Called it a beaver's nest. I was blind.
Pride is a colder draft than any storm, George.
Outside, the blizzard clawed at the cabin like a wild animal. Inside, the silence between the two men was no longer a wall, but a bridge.
I am sorry for all of it.
We'll talk when the world thaws. For now, keep your family close.
Mary poured a cup of hot tea for George's wife. They sat side by side on a bench, saying nothing, but the steam rose like a truce between them. George's son stirred, murmuring in his sleep. George pulled the blanket higher, then looked at the bark wall, and something in his chest unclenched. The storm would pass, but the debt to Matthias and Sonia Berg would remain, carved into the bark that kept their descendants alive this night. The blizzard died before dawn. A pale sun rose over a valley buried in white, and the bark cabin stood without a single split seam. One by one, the townsfolk emerged from shattered plank houses. They stared at Samuel's home, the beaver's nest, and saw a fortress. George Harlow stepped out of the bark cabin, his family behind him. He walked to where the crowd had gathered.
Listen to me. This cabin, Samuel Bell's bark walls, saved my children. He saved us all.
A murmur passed through the onlookers. An old man touched the bark, then nodded, eyes wide.
I called it trash. I said it would rot and bring vermin. I was a fool.
Samuel stayed in the doorway, his arm around Mary. He said nothing, but his eyes glistened.
The laughter is gone. Now they understand. The old ways didn't die. They were just forgotten.
A woman whose child had warmed by the bark stove stepped forward and shook Samuel's hand. Others followed. By midday, the whole valley had seen the proof. The beaver's nest had become the strongest house in the territory. Spring arrived quietly. The bark, now silvered by months of frost, shed the meltwater as cleanly as the day it was laid. Inside, Mary lifted the inscribed sheet. She chose a peg on the main wall and hung it where all who entered would see.
Their names belong here as much as the bark.
A reminder that we are only tenants of this valley.
Now they'll never be forgotten again.
The firelight caught the carved letters, turning them to gold.
That bark sheet is more than history. It's a promise that the old ways won't be lost again.
Outside, the last ice melted from the eaves. The deadliest winter in memory had passed.
We'll never be cold again, not like before.
The bark cabin stood, wrapped in its pale skin, carrying the names of the forgotten into every spring that followed. George found Samuel on the thawing path through the birch grove, a shingle in one hand and a hammer in the other.
The Bergs. Did they leave any family behind? Anyone we can find?
Number. Only their words survived, but those words held my walls together.
They walked in silence, stepping over silver rivulets of meltwater that snaked through the moss.
His knowledge saved my children. I'll carry Matthias and Sonia's names as long as I live.
At the tree line, George stopped and looked back at the bark cabin, pale and solid against the greening slope.
I'll rebuild the old Berg homestead. Put their name on a stone. No more forgetting.
That's a good thing, George. The first good thing to come from that old wrong.
They shook hands, not the quick grip of a trade, but the slow clasp of two men who understood what the winter had cost. Then George walked on, and Samuel stood alone, watching the bark cabin carry its 1,000-year secret into the sun. By full summer, wildflowers crowded the bark cabin's base. The walls had silvered but held fast, a pale armor against every season yet to come. Through the open window, the carved sheet of bark caught the light. Matthias and Sonia Berg, 1847, visible to every passing neighbor. The old ways, once mocked as a beaver's nest, had outlasted the deadliest winter in memory. Plank houses had split and fallen. Steel nails had rusted, but this skin of birch bent with the cold and shed every storm. And, in the end, it was not the sawmills or the lumber barons who were right. It was a man with a fallen birch and a diary from the forgotten. Samuel Bell never built another house. He didn't need to. The bark cabin became a landmark, a lesson carved in wood and time, and every child born in that valley after the great winter learned the story of the Bergs and of the bark that would not yield. The old ways did not die. They were sleeping under the snow, waiting for someone to remember. Samuel remembered. And because he did, this valley still has walls that breathe and a secret written in birch. The beaver's nest still stands. And in the stillness of a winter night, if you listen, you can hear the old ones breathing through the bark.